Hello and good evening, good morning, good afternoon. It's evening here. This is just a little tiny quick ramble while I wait for my niece to arrive from out of town. I'm about a week out of getting in a moderate car accident, and it's just opened me up to some intriguing possibilities, I guess. It's got me thinking a lot about how pain is an initiation, and I'll try to keep this on the straight and narrow, but we don't really have initiation in our society anymore. I am writing something about this currently, so prepare to see it later, but we don't really have a framework within which to house physical pain, or mental pain for that matter, as previous traditional societies and current existing traditional societies had. We don't have this framework to conceptualize pain within. All we see it as is the opposite of comfort, and our society prioritizes comfort above all else. So therefore, discomfort is inherently bad in most Western minds. And so this has been a struggle. I was already off on med leave because I hurt my foot. So to also have a car accident happen at the same time, and not that I was like out and about doing all sorts of shenanigans with a sprained foot, but my day-to-day life was, let's say 80% normal. And with this car accident, not only is it maybe 40 or 50% normal, it's also unpredictable. There's days that, it's only 10% normal because I have a concussion, so I want to sleep a lot. And in my mind, when I'm sleeping a lot, it usually means I'm depressed. Turns out concussions also cause depression. My depression has been exceptional lately. And so this has all kind of got me thinking about pain and the role that pain plays in our lives. And I am one to take pain as the initiation ritual in any form that it comes. The place within which that I find myself nowadays would not have been possible without the, say, 4 years of mental anguish that I went through at the hands of mental illness. And that was the goad that pushed me into finding something that made me happy and didn't leave space for, pretty severe depression and anxiety. And so coming back into this state with a renewed thought process surrounding it really feels cyclical to me of, hey, did you learn the lesson yet? And so it's been intriguing, knowing what I know and being able to help other people through something like this, and having to take that same care with myself, and having to see where my life has been lacking in, I guess, the strong habits that I need to properly take care of myself. But also, it's just been interesting to see where I now turn to for support. And when I was suffering, a couple years back, a few years now, I guess, like 2015 or so, 2014. Oh, it's almost 10 years, oh goodness. When I was suffering then, it was very much, I was hoping for someone to swoop in and save me. I remember at one point, this is so dramatic, but sharing it for the sake of authenticity. I remember being on my way to university one day, and I really didn't want to go. I just wanted to stay in bed and sleep, and I couldn't handle anything, couldn't handle life, nothing. I think I had a test that day, so I had to be there. And I spent the entirety of the bus ride crying, not like loudly sobbing or anything, but, tears rolling down my face, because I don't know what I was upset about, but something. And thinking to myself, all these people on this bus, and no one's noticed that I'm crying, and no one stepped in and said, hey, are you okay? And I had this preconceived notion that people should and would step in and try to effectively save me. I didn't consider it saving at the time, and don't get me wrong, I really do think it is crucial for people to step up their behavior in terms of being a community in support of people with mental illness. That's something I'll get into later maybe, but yeah, it's definitely something that is lacking, and I think that is part of why people are suffering with depression and anxiety so bad, is because they don't have that support structure in place, and people don't support one another to the full extent, and people also don't know how to accept support to the full extent. So at that point in time, waiting for someone to swoop in and save me, and looking back at that and seeing my response now, and my response now for myself is understanding to give myself space to feel the feelings that I'm feeling, somatically identifying where in the body that I'm feeling these feelings, identifying what, depression is pretty wide sweeping, am I depressed because my car got totaled? Am I depressed because of the worry about finances? Am I depressed because of the limitations that my body is now experiencing? Identifying what aspects of that depression are at the forefront. And then from there, allowing myself to feel that feeling, but then also, setting a point where it's like, okay, we've been crying for a couple hours. Like, let's change it up a little bit and see how things go. What are we going to do for that? So, tapping, magnetics, those have been my go-to so far. Asking for support from friends. And this is the other thing, going back to me crying on the bus. When you need support, especially in this day and age where you are not living in close quarters with a lot of people, you do need to reach out and ask. And you do need to not set boundaries, like communicate the needs that you're experiencing, and not expect others to just know your state based on your social media posts or something like that. So I reached out to friends, which was different from what I used to do. I leaned really heavily into, it took me a while to remember I needed to do it, but leaned pretty heavily into my spiritual practice, and had some intriguing experiences there. Found a podcast that's teaching how to get involved with magic, which is something I've kind of considered, but I just haven't had the time for. And now, I'm literally stuck at home with ample time to do something like this. So this is what I'm leaning into. I subscribed to the Patreon for this one podcast, and, I'm learning what that looks like for me in my daily life and how I incorporate something like that. And, one of the aspects was asking for dreams, asking for messages in dreams, or asking for experiences in dreams. So I've given that a shot, and I had a pretty intriguing experience with that, and really got more involved with meditations and creating rituals and stuff like that. And it's been really good, and it's, not every day is perfect, and it's not like a constant climb upwards into positivity by any means. It's definitely been up and down, up and down, up and down. But it's been up and down, up and down, up and down. It hasn't been downhill 24/7 like it used to be. And so I've essentially provided myself with this framework of how to cope with mental anguish. Haven't quite figured out the physical anguish part of it, but it's been a pretty intriguing journey thus far. And I do see this almost as a second initiation of sorts, where the first bout of mental anguish was me realizing I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't live the way I was living anymore. I couldn't focus solely on achieving goalposts that society had set for me that I actually had no interest in achieving. And now, seeing that and seeing where I can lean into other things, it's initiating me deeper into the framework that I've already set up for myself. And so with that, you're going to have to forgive me. This concussion, turns out, messes with your brain a lot. I entirely forgot where I was going with this topic. Give me a second. And now I'm nervous about it, so I can't think well. I guess we'll just tangent a little bit. I do see mental anguish because we don't experience physical anguish like we used to in traditional societies. Coming to the doorstep of death as part of a induction into adulthood. We no longer have that. And so now something is trying to continue to initiate us in the way that's most accessible, which is our brains. And I think especially in this day and age now, because our brains are so much more focused and so much more busy and so much more engaged. Not to say that ancient peoples didn't engage the brain by any means, but it was a brain and body. It wasn't mostly a brain. And so this mental illness sort of wave I think that we're seeing is a lot of people realizing they're not happy with where the world is at and where they're at and where their life is at. And it's good in a way because it's a learning opportunity and it is something that you can grow from. And this is one thing that really fascinates me is post-traumatic growth, the growth that people experience post-trauma. And mental illness, like a severe bout of mental illness, is really traumatic. Like, I would argue in some instances, when you're going through a severe depressive episode, you do become very abusive to yourself. Be it denying yourself basic physical needs, or the way in which you speak to yourself, or the way in which you conceptualize the world and its responses to you. It's very, very psychopathic to behave that way to yourself. And this is something that I think people, they're going to have to learn how to overcome. This is the initiation ritual of our time, but again, we don't have the framework within which to house it, so we don't even know how to approach it aside from what society tells us is appropriate, which is go and see a counselor, a psychologist, go and take pills. And more, I think this is just growing pains for psychology, really, but more and more what I'm seeing from friends and from myself and from others who I've talked to is therapy helps initially because it gives you someone to talk to and it gives you that sense of community. But 6 months or more out, depending on the person, but from what I've seen, 6 months or more out from your initial approach to therapy, it can actually become quite traumatic for many people. And what I've noticed is there seems to be a tendency for people who don't have a lot of empathy to go into a career that should be entirely based on empathy. And these professionals who you're expecting to be empathetic, who really aren't, who have their own career goals and their own desires, it becomes ego-driven, and it becomes, they see, so, and this is not to say that all therapists are like this by any means, but, when you apply sort of the factory, capitalistic, consumeristic framework to a profession that should inherently be the opposite of all of those, there is quite a large, I would say, margin for error and margin for further traumatization. And because you're in this position as a therapist of you have to dissolve yourself of the ego, you have to be there for this person, you have to act as this community that this person should have and would have had were we not in the society that we are currently in. And it's just not a good scenario, I suppose. And I think we are kind of reaching the breaking point with that, where people are becoming so non-functional or so dysfunctional that the little bit of framework that we do have set up for mental illness is not sufficient in the slightest. And this is causing almost a catastrophic failure, at least from what I've seen in my social circles. And just knowing people that I know, and it's really interesting seeing the difference within age gaps too, because I've noticed that for people who are of Gen X, the mental illness is there. The dissatisfaction with life is there. There is still the tendency of, well, this is just the way it is. Life just is this way. Like, this is how it goes. And sort of an acceptance of the circumstances. But, like, deep, deep set misery taken as just a matter of fact of life. When there are some simple choices that could be made to change up your life. However, because it's something that, like, people in, like, Gen X and, like, boomers have always known, the desire to change it is not there. Whereas millennials, they're miserable and they want to change it, and they're sort of changing it, but they're still kind of bound by society. And then I think Gen Z, I think this is where we're really seeing it, but it, like, well, an attempt at it, I should say. It's still within the same framework of this society. I'm talking about, like, influencers and, like, online courses and stuff like that. Like, it is really people taking it into their own hands, which is a good thing to see. However, it's still within the framework of capitalism and profit generation and a lack of connection and a lack of authenticity marketed as authentic, which I understand the irony here of me being a holistic practitioner who talks a lot about the authentic self, but is also trying to run a business online. So yeah, it's just it's a little interesting, and being forced to just sit and think has given me the opportunity to really consider, I guess, just like how this initiation ritual is going for society as a whole. I don't think we've got it yet. I think it's going to be another generation at least before we really see some changes, if we see some changes. Society does a really good job of prioritizing comfort and making us prioritize comfort. And it's very hard to get uncomfortable with discomfort. And it's interesting the way in which society now tries to do that. So, like, the first place my brain goes, there we go, is like cold water therapy, which, don't get me wrong, is absolutely phenomenal, and I'm really craving, sorry, my dog's scratching her face off in the background, really craving a dunk in a nice frosty river to maybe help with some of this body pain. But that pain is that's an intriguing way to introduce pain into society, because it's a minute to 2 minutes at a time, and then typically the carrot on the end of the stick there is the sauna warm up, and if you can just stick out 2 minutes of breathing through discomfort, then you go get to get your nice toasty treat, But also at the same time, I think in introducing physical pain into society again is pretty difficult because it comes with moralistic connotations. I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, that we see an initiation ritual that can bring someone close to death, and even, have instances where people die from it, without serious implications in society, and probably someone getting charged as a cult leader. So it's kind of a conundrum of how do you introduce this pain to initiate people and get people comfortable with discomfort and comfortable with death again. I don't think it's something that can happen in our modern society. Honestly, I think things have to be completely dissolved to get to this point. And I think it's going to be a long time. Now, that's not to say, like, of course, me sitting in this comfortable office, all comfied up and, central heating going because it's, like, 3 degrees outside. I don't think that I personally could handle that level of pain. I mean, I have experienced levels of pain. I think really, like, where pain is acceptable in our society still is within medicine and within the healing process. But we're more cognizant of the pain in those instances on the other side of it. To be cognizant of pain as you're being brought to the brink of death, and to witness that threshold, and then probably not be as as cognizant on the way back from it, but probably still something there. I think that has more significance in some ways. Just as someone who's had a near-death experience, like the loss of control and the surrender that you have to experience as you approach death. You don't get that on the other side. You get the, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I made it through that. Like, oh boy, like now I gotta heal, now I gotta recover. And that's a different type of pain. Because you're not facing uncertainty. And uncertainty is like an entity versus just, oh, I wonder what'll happen. Like, it's very much like, there's this threshold here and I don't know what's on the other side, but I'm likely about to find out very soon. There is value to that. I mean, maybe this is something VR can be used for, who knows. I'm just kind of feeling into if there's anything else that needs to come out. Car accidents hurt, man. Like, we're at 11. Oh, yeah, no, I don't recommend that. Well, actually, let's discuss that too within the connotation of initiation, and like pain in general. Like this, not that it's an allowable pain. Nobody wants a car accident, but that form of pain too. It's so sudden and it's so fast. Like, you don't even have time to think, and then it's there, and it's like, oh my goodness, and then the pain again is afterward. Whereas an initiation ritual, it is a march to that threshold rather than a sudden arrival. Yeah, it's I don't know. I think it is something that we do need to shift our perspective on when we go through pain, be it mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, whatever it is. It's an opportunity. That is something that I'm coming to view discomfort more and more as an opportunity to see where things go. And because discomfort is so contrary to just the way that society proceeds, one thing that I've noticed personally is living in this new discomfort. This has entirely shaken up my life, and oftentimes, like, that sort of liminal space is where you will have the most unusual experiences and be able to shift things easier in your life because things are not so, following the same old track as per usual. It's not the same daily routine. So it's easier to shake things up in your life when you're going through something and to make big changes than it is to try to make a big change when you are in a level of routine and comfort. And for me, what's been fascinating is noticing the synchronicities. The synchronicities are insane right now for me. To the point of, like, hearing a random radio station mention something about a license plate with 777s on it, and then seeing a license plate with 777s within the span of like a couple minutes, and overhearing conversations, and then seeing, similar things discussed in those conversations that I overheard, just appearing in my life. Like, it's very, and not only that, but also seeing, patterns showing up in the lives of my friends. I'm going through, pretty severe pain here, and seeing that all of a sudden another friend of mine is going through the same thing, or seeing that, a couple of my friends, their exes have contacted them within the week, and it seems to be that they're trying to get back together with them. And it's put me external a little bit to the pattern to be able to witness it, if that makes sense. And that's intriguing, but I also don't know what to do with that information. I'm kind of sitting here like, all right, where are we going? Like, what's next? And I was listening to a podcast recently that said that, I think it was Carl Jung, said that synchronicities were like messages from ourselves in the future to ourselves now, which is all fine and dandy, but like, what am I trying to say to myself? Are these like confirmations of like, yeah, you're doing right, like you're making the right choices? Or is it like, hey, don't do that? Or is it just like, hey, like, how's it going? You're doing good, like just acknowledgement of this cyclical nature of existence. And yeah, so it's been intriguing there. It's also been intriguing, just in terms of my, I guess, spiritual connection to the world. I've had a lot more deeply spiritual experiences, but my brain also kind of feels cut off from my intuition to some extent. I find it very hard to get intuitive hits lately, and I don't know if that's just the concussion or my mental state or just a lot on my mind lately or what, but yeah, it's intriguing. The other thing that I've noticed too is like setting intentions and manifesting has really like big things have come to fruition for me in the last week, in terms of some steps towards my future, in terms of the outcome of this accident, and just everything being okay, like financially. I was driving a car that was less than a month old, on a lease, and it's gonna be fully covered, which, I mean, maybe I've never had an accident like this before. I don't know how unusual this is, but it just feels fortuitous. My family always goes on that we're cursed, but I don't personally believe that, because like, despite the crap that we have gone through as a family, we are so much more well off than other people I know who've gone through similar or worse, who've had their lives absolutely ruined and turned upside down. Meanwhile, we've gone through some pretty bad stuff, but we still have a roof over our heads, a vehicle that's coming, and food on our table. Like, it's really inspired a deep gratitude within me, which is, it could be why the manifestation is working better. But yeah, it's different for sure. It's also been intriguing to see the response from various people in my life, from concern of just what happened to a willingness to not upend their lives, but like upend their routine to help me, and seeing who that's coming from and who I thought it would have come from in a situation like this versus who it's actually coming from. And that's not to critique anyone, I've been in the position where like I want to help people, but I can't for whatever reason. And that's not, I'm not upset about that. I'm just surprised at where the support has come from. And yeah, it's part of me feels like there's something really good coming out of this. I'm not entirely sure what yet, but it's an interesting thing to see and feel, and also an interesting way to approach something like this, because me a couple years ago wouldn't think that. I would think that everything sucked and my life was ruined, which I did for the first 2 days. Don't get me wrong, I did feel that, but I allowed myself to feel that, and then I was like, okay, that's enough of that, like, well, moving on. And not even that severe, but like, hey, let's try and shake things up a little bit and get out of this funk for a little while. And I think too, when people can approach traumatic events with kind of a question of like, okay, what's going to happen next? I think that can be, sorry, I just got a text, I can't do two things at once, and I forgot my train of thought. You know what, that's okay. My niece just arrived in the city, so I need to go and get her, and so this was a very short little ramble that maybe didn't make a lot of sense because my brain is wackadoodle right now. I guess it's one last thought. It's a very interesting idea to see what was going on for you directly before something happens. And is it a normal routine? Or are things already getting shaken up before something traumatic happens? Because for me, the night before this gigantic car accident, it's not that gigantic. I'm kind of sounding a little dramatic. I'm sorry. It was a mildly traumatic experience, but the night before this accident, I did something that scared the living daylights out of me, and it had a much more positive outcome than I could have anticipated, and it made me feel very proud of myself, and very delighted that it had the outcome that it did, and it built a fair bit of trust for me with another person in my life to see how that they responded to something like this. Sorry, that's super vague, but yeah, it was a big routine shakeup. And I think, personally, when you start shaking the routine up, other things start shaking in your life. And so for me, I started shaking the routine up, and then the accident shook things up even more. And I think that was par for the course. Like, I can't think of a fun metaphor right now, but, like an object in motion stays in motion kind of vibe, right? So you're shaking things up, you're shaking routine up, and then your life is like, oh, okay, we're doing this now, we're shaking things up? Okay, yeah, we are shaking things up, like, let's go. And that's what it did, like, I got shook like a motherfucking Etch-a-Sketch, man. So, we started the little shakies the night before, and then we rocked the Etch-a-Sketch on the Saturday, and then, by the Thursday, we're still shaking things. Well, it's Friday now, but yesterday, things continued to shake. And things are continuing to shake. And, they're slowing down and they're not as scary now, but many things are continuing to shake. And so before a traumatic event happens, after it happens, but, look back at what was going on in your life just before it. And is this just the shakeup you need? And people always get salty when you try to cast things with a positive light, but I don't believe in that. If you're gonna be miserable, don't listen to my podcast. I'm sorry. If you're gonna say that, I gotta leave it there. I gotta go get my niece from the bus. Be positive, not be positive. Look for the silver lining. You don't have to be positive about it, but just look for it. And yeah, shake some things up. Shake your little Etch-a-Sketch life up and put yourself in a better position. And yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm recording a new episode soon with a guest that I'm really excited about, who is not a friend, so it's going to be it's shaking things up again, shaking it up again. So hopefully this will be out pretty soon. It is Friday. I'm hoping this will be out maybe tomorrow or the next day. And yeah, thank you for those who have supported me. Sorry for being MIA, but you know what? My brain is really messed up right now. So yeah, have a good evening.